The Karen Hunter Show. Keep the conversation going on Twitter at Karen Hunter and at SXM Urban View. Now, here's Karen Hunter.
Yes, welcome back. Hottest show in the galaxy. And I believe that wellness is holistic, and that means mind, body, and soul. And we need to start young. Start our babies up, raise them up with all of the knowledge of self and love of understanding of community. And this woman is doing that. She's trying to break down all of the barriers and teach. I love it. Let me welcome Dr. Crystal Menzies. She's the founder of Emancipated Education. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Listen, this is the season. So I just was telling the audience, let's build up our babies' libraries. Let's get the young people in with the libraries. And now you have cards, history, illustrated hidden history cards. And I like that you call it hidden history, not Black history, because we have to move away from it's history, period. Okay. All right. So first, tell me your background, Dr. Menzies.
So where do I even begin? I was a teacher in South Los Angeles for ages, following in my grandfather's footsteps, who was also a teacher in East LA and South LA. And then saw a lot of shenanigans go down.
Like what? I'm believing now, we've been doing this in class with Carr for two plus years now. And it's like, man, we don't know anything. It's like the school system keeps pumping into us these random facts and stats and data that is completely to indoctrinate us into a way of being that will not free us. And all of us are bought into it because you got to go first, second, third grade, high school, college, and beyond, or else you won't be successful. And what it's doing is, I think, destroying so much of who we could potentially be. So what kind of shenanigans did you see, Dr. Menzies?
Well, two things stand out the most. So my first year teaching 8th grade social science, which in California is U.S. history, I noticed that the first year students who hadn't been indoctrinated in a system of testing, even though their test scores were lower, they were the most vivacious, making all the connections all across the, systems and all the different content areas. And then by my fourth year, I noticed those students who had been part of this more systematized testing structure asked fewer questions, were less interested in interrogating things. And I remember, I like to teach very open-ended. What do you think about this? And I would sometimes get, well, is this going to be on the test? Is this what we need to know for the test? And I was able to break that down a lot, because my kids were brilliant across all these age ranges, but I started to see how the system really started to box in what they thought was possible and what they thought they should be doing in a classroom. And then I got in trouble, okay? And my kids tested well, so I thought I'd be left alone. My kids doing what you want them to do, because I noticed I went to an HBCU for undergrad. So when I started teaching, I was like, you're gonna learn all the stuff I learned in college. Like, I was angry I didn't get this earlier. So we're gonna learn about the depths and depravity of enslavement in the United States, how its tentacles have infiltrated all of our systems. So it wasn't just, that thing that happened in the South a couple hundred years ago. Like, the people who created the Constitution were human traffickers. How do you think that influences what our Constitution allows and what it doesn't allow? We've had those kind of conversations. And then one of my Black male students was like, why are we talking about Black folks all the time? And I was like, huh? But after doing some pushing, I realized I wasn't telling the whole story. So I was showing what had been done to Black bodies consistently. I wasn't showing how we resisted, how we consistently pushed back. The beauty and brilliance that emerged from us pushing back. And so I taught a series of lessons on rebellions of enslaved people in what is now the United States. And it is a California standard, but it's a low priority standard, meaning it's less likely to be tested. And I just happened to get observed by my white principal that day. I don't think it was a coincidence. I think word got round about what I was teaching. And I was written up for not teaching a high priority standard. That was the high level feedback, and when she spoke to me, was like, why are you teaching this content? It kind of makes me uncomfortable. I noticed a need in my students. That's why I'm teaching it. Like, and this is what we should be teaching. So things like that. I was like, everything, you can only do so much in these four walls when you have people pushing against the bare minimum, you know? So those were some of the shenanigans I saw.
I think about every system, which is all about your compliance and your obedience. As a rebellious person from little, I was never going to conform, you know. And being a teacher, understanding what your children need, what your students need in that moment, which is to be engaged here in their minds, right? To open their minds so that they can receive all this other stuff. To have now this stricture put on you. So you either do what they tell you to do, or you don't get to be successful, which is the whole thing, right? Be a good be a good person, and you'll get rewarded. Do all of these things we tell you to do, and here's what's going to happen. Goodness is going to come. And if you don't, so for all of the teachers out there who were like you, Dr. Crystal Menzies, who got, you know, it's discouraging, right? Because you know you're finally you're seeing the light bulbs go on over kids' heads, but that's not what the system. You're outside of the system. So what did you do?
I pushed back, and was like, you know, this I feel is necessary for my students to encounter, because the only standards about Black people are about enslavement. Why not show the full spectrum of what happened during the period of enslavement in this country? And was also like, why are you bothering me? If I'm meeting all the metrics you need me to meet, shouldn't I have a little bit of leeway here? And I ended up being punished in other ways. So you remember, this is a white person. They're not going to directly say or do anything to you. I was passed over for leadership positions in the school because I rocked the boat too much. And I had to find this out through like the assistant principal and things. And so that was also very discouraging. Also lost some students to violence, and really wanted to understand more of the socioeconomic factors that impacted what was going on in the classroom and in my students' lives outside of the classroom. So went to Temple's Urban Education PhD program to really learn about specifically how race and class structure our experiences. And it's the foundation of our program is critical race theory. So we learn all the things about all the systems. And from there, was able to name a lot of what happened to me in the classroom. You know, I didn't have the language for it before. And what was happening with my students. I'm like, oh, people have actually studied this. People are railing against it. I had no idea, because information was so siloed, especially, you know, I started teaching pre-smartphones, you know, pre the smartphone era. Facebook existed, but it was a little bootleg site. MySpace existed. So, and then, but what I felt too far away from students in academia. Like I said, there's all this good stuff happening in the circles I was running in, but it wasn't crossing a barrier and like getting to people and helping other folks name and see and resist. And so I entered the nonprofit world after I graduated. Now, this is the ed reform nonprofit world. This is not grassroots nonprofits. So these are the folks who parachute in to save the Black and brown kids of America.
Oh.
And I was naive, you know, I did not know there were these distinctions, okay? And I was pulled in, because this was early, 2016, before anti-racist became the term de jour out there. And they were using that terminology. They were using terminology we were using in our critical race theory world. I'm like, okay, so they must get it. I've gotten out of this habit, but I have a bad habit. Words of affirmation is one of my love languages. So when people say things, I believe it. Why would you?
I mean, because people's words should be impeccable, and we should demand that of them. We shouldn't let people off the hook for saying things and then not honoring it. We're talking with Dr. Crystal Menzies. Emancipatiededucation.com is where you can see her work. So it led you to do this. Walk me through these cards, um, this experience that is sold out. Walk me through what someone will get. Why would they buy this
Mhm.
illustrated hidden history, the cards, or the Emancipated Experience?
So in that nonprofit world, experienced also a lot of shenanigans and started to wonder, like, how can I try to be a free, liberated person in the midst of these oppressive systems? Like, where can you go and pay bills and not be exposed to these, intersecting, matrix of domination? And
Hmm.
it brought me back to maroons and maroonage, which I learned about in college and was like a separate passion of mine, but never thought to like embody maroonage in my life until I was having these experiences. Like, wait, there's a group of people who are free people surrounded by oppressive systems who wanted them to just be destroyed. Like, what can I learn from maroons? And so that's what led me to this work. I first, as a teacher, developed a whole framework on like how does one become a maroon. You have that awakening, the status quo ain't it. You start to identify the specific mechanisms of oppression, start to identify what to do differently. You build community with like-minded people, and you try to like expand that awareness and build a broader community. Shared it with one of my friends who got it, and she was like, this is great, but a lot of people don't even know who maroons are. I was like, you're right. So that's where the cards came in. It was like, what can I create that's accessible? I used to use cards in my classroom a lot when I was a teacher. What can I create that's accessible that gives people an overview of who maroons are and what they've done in our society? And I don't highlight all maroons. So the cards, this is what
Yeah, I'm looking at them. It's beautiful, by the way. The art.
thank you.
Give us one maroon that we wouldn't know. Not Nanny.
Not Nanny.
Give
Nope.
it not Nanny. Give us a maroon that people probably have never heard of.
King Bayano from Panama is someone I'm low-key obsessed with, maybe high-key. So he led the largest rebellion of Maroon peoples in the Americas. He had at its height, a total of 1,200 soldiers fighting against Spain. And he signed treaties with English pirates to bring down Spanish ships, to raid Spanish gold and silver, to like fund their rebellion. And was at the Spanish throats for a very, very long time. And the Spanish being who they were, and not just them, all the European powers, they could not conquer them through warfare, so they used trickery. So they said, okay, we'll sign a peace treaty. And so when they invited him to sign the peace treaty, they kidnapped him. And the interesting thing is, he was so well respected by his enemies as like a military genius that they first sent him to exile in Peru, but then they sent him into exile in Spain to live off of the wealth he had accumulated raiding their gold and silver. And it kind of reminds me of Braveheart with a different ending. He was young. This was a by any means necessary, get free or die trying orientation. And just his military genius and strategy, his ability to nation build and like inspire folks is something I'm really inspired by.
Where were his peoples from originally?
I know he was enslaved in Africa and brought to Panama. They don't know his nation of origin or his people of origin, we should say at this time.
All that is because there's so many. We were watching The Woman King, and of course the Dora Milaje of the Wakandans, which is a fictional place, but based off of things that happened. And Ghana has its Akan warriors, and it's Adinkra warriors. And you think about all of the stories that were never told. We get Phyllis Wheatley's little poetry, and then some Frederick Douglass and some Harriet Tubman, and a pat on the head. What y'all gonna get? So this is important. How do you want people to engage with Emancipated Education?
Well, I would love if folks can you can purchase the cards on their own. So the cards talk about important themes in Maroonage, like self-defense, self-determination, And then we identified 9 important Maroon leaders and 9 important Maroon communities. These are not all the Maroon leaders that existed. These are not all the Maroon communities that existed, but some of the larger communities like Palmares in Brazil. I wanted to highlight Maroon communities throughout the Americas, because typically if we've learned about Maroons, you maybe have heard about the Jamaican folks. And that's it. I wanted to show every place enslavement existed, there were also a group of free people fighting against these systems. So we have what's now the US, Mexico, Panama, Colombia, Brazil, Jamaica, and Suriname are covered in this section.
This is it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's necessary. I want to keep having a conversation with you off mic as we build spaces for our people, our young people in particular. Kudos and congrats, Dr. Crystal Menzies. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.